I'm Nick Hughes, and this is Founders Live Conversations. Officially open this and welcome you to the Founders Live Learning Series. This is a series that we put together in association with The Lonely Entrepreneur, and we have Michael Dermer here that I would like to bring into the conversation and have him give an overview, first and foremost, introduce himself and a bit of an overview of The Lonely Entrepreneur. And then we will get into the topic of discussion today, which is really around finding your playground. And what that really means is, and this is just such an exciting topic for me, which is really helping you find the area that is uncharted to build your brand, that is away from competition, that uniquely identifies your brand in a space that others aren't competing in. So this is gonna be really exciting, but I wanna bring in Michael Dermer.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you again, everybody, for having me. I also happen to be here with Victoria Sherman, also from the Lonely Entrepreneur. Nick, it's a pleasure. A little bit of my background, I started my career as an M&A lawyer in New York City, and I left and started what got to be known as the first company to reward people for being healthy. Built that up over the course of about 10 years, starting in 2000, and sold it, but not before living through the typical entrepreneurial journey where, the healthcare industry told us, not only don't we reward people for being healthy, we will never do that. And fought the fight, as many of us do, to bring that to life. Built the company up to about a 500-person company by 2008, watched it almost get destroyed overnight by the financial crisis, built it back up and sold it. And that journey, as you have heard many times, Nick, led us to The Lonely Entrepreneur. After that whole experience, I was fortunate enough to sell my company. Somebody said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely, and thought, wow, what better way to wake up every day than to try to help people, as we like to say here, turn our passion into success. And so our big thing was that, there's plenty of people that have passion and great ideas, but how you actually turn that into the type of financial and personal success you have. So we do that largely through a subscription-based product called the Lonely Entrepreneur Learning Community, which is a series of kind of a one-stop shop for knowledge, tools, and support, as well as through a series of coaching services. And then on our nonprofit side, we're actually launching some amazingly interesting initiatives around our platform. One soon to come out called the Black Entrepreneur Initiative, where we're trying to empower the Black community with entrepreneurial resources, partnering with a whole bunch of cool people whose names you will know when it'll come out. So, but our mission at the end of the day is, how do we take the individual entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur and give them a real better chance of success, not just a conceptual chance of success, and have partnered with Founders Live and with Nick to try to see if we can help, everybody in the Founders Live world have a better shot. So that's me.
Well, great. Yes. Thank you, Michael. And, we spoke about this a little bit in our last conversation, really, but this is, as Founders Live grows and moves forward, this is one of our main areas of focus, which is really around education and learning. And, it is our belief that, that with especially Founders Live, this sort of information and experience really should be free for us, like the way that we view it, for people to start engaging with the Founders Live community and really like get some quality education around, look, if I have an idea, and I think someone already said it earlier, it's like they seem to be an aspiring entrepreneur that has an idea and they're just looking to like take the first steps to learn about what they should do. And you bring great resources to that. So we've opened that up. Really appreciate, the Lonely Entrepreneur for bringing that into focus and having the learning community to be a free resource for any Founders Live member. Yep. So that's awesome. Thank you. And what I would like to do now is really step into this conversation about, finding your playground. So, this will be a interview conversation. It's a group interview. I've posted in chat. If you have a question, we want you to engage. Okay. So if you have a question, just type it in the chat, or even say, hey, I have a question. And what we want to do is pull you in And if you want to either be on camera or at least vocal voice, you can ask us, you can ask Michael, and we'll address that question. It's a group conversation, so please engage. But Michael and I are going to have an initial conversation around this. And what I would like to do is really just kind of toss it to you and say, with this topic, what does finding that playground really mean? What is that terminology? And let's start the directional conversation around what does it mean to go find an open playground?
What's super interesting is even pre-COVID, we lived in a super hyper competitive world. And when you really think about what people pay attention to, whether it's somebody you're selling to or an investor or even us, people don't go and buy a car and open up the glove compartment and read the manual and say, it's got a little better this. But I mean, it really has to make us go kind of, ooh, right? That's a thing. And when you think about a lot of times when people start businesses, someone will say, I'm going to start a PR firm, and friends will say, oh, that's great. There's a PR conference at McCormick Center in Chicago. You should go there. Well, that's the last place you would go, right? So the whole point of it is if the context is there's competition everywhere, right? And there's always people with more capital and more resources. And if we all on this call come up with a great idea that's life-changing, then Google and Apple probably care about it. So when all of that context of competition, and with post-COVID even hyper competition, how is it that you win? We all use the same tools. We're all using the same social and marketing and websites. And so if we're all using the same stuff and somebody else has more money, how do you actually win? And so when we think about, sometimes people, kind of give a disservice and say, well, you need your unique selling proposition. Well, most of the time, people aren't even paying attention to unique selling proposition because the world's so cluttered. I mean, what would it take you, anybody here, to actually pay attention to one of the emails that comes in your email box? Even if it said a free $1 billion, right? There's a 99% chance we wouldn't open it. So the point is that given that whole context, the idea of a unique selling proposition isn't enough, right? What you really have to do is find the spot, the position where you're literally the only game in town, where you are defining it. And the best example of this, although Nick, as I've shared with you in the past, we didn't call it this at the time. Think about my old business, rewarding people for being healthy. At the time we started that business, there were credit card loyalty programs, airline loyalty, hotel loyalty. I mean, loyalty programs everywhere, okay? And the people that ran those programs, the companies that ran those programs, like your credit card loyalty program, were multi-billion-dollar companies, huge companies that ran all these. But all we did was apply it to healthcare. All we did was take the very same concept and apply it to a playground where nobody else is playing, right? And once we apply it there, even though it was, I take some behavior, I get some points, I earn some rewards. Once we applied it there, we are then defining the rules, right? We're defining who should buy what are the pricing criteria you should buy. So when one of those other big behemoths came into our playground, it would be like, no, you're not supposed to come in here unless you have a kid, right? Like we had defined rules, and I don't want to call them traps, but we had set the criteria for why people had done stuff, because in our playground, we knew it, we got to know it, right? And when you think of it this way, if you go into a playground and you drive the same way to work every day, you commute the same way, right? You know where the traffic is, you know how the weather affects you, right? You really define it. And so the fight to find this playground allows us to go to bed at night going, I'm going to own this pocket. Now, it might not be a blockbuster drug. Mine, because it was the year 2000, was a little bit of a blockbuster drug because it was healthcare and it was big, whatever. But the hardest thing, we can all launch websites and come up with sales decks and pitch investors. But at the end of the day, can we really find a playground where it's uniquely us, right? And there's a million examples of this, and it requires some of your best thought and bringing together, advisors and others to be able to do it. But think about the way we think about my business. And then you go, oh yeah, of course, we're rewarding people for being healthy. That's what it feels like when you file the playground. But why didn't American Express do it? Like, you would drive down the street in the 16th Street Mall in Denver, right? And there'd be a big billboard that said, right, go get your your mammogram and you get 100,000 American Rescue Reward points, right? What we've got to do is we've got to get over this idea of just this unique selling proposition and find these pockets where we win. And I'm happy to share, tons and tons of examples. Great example of this is Starbucks. When Starbucks started, here was the situation, right? Take New York City, where I'm from. There was coffee on every corner. It was pretty good. It was $2, right? And this is what Starbucks said. Starbucks said, we're going to put a coffee shop in every corner, right next to the other ones. We're going to charge $4 for coffee. And oh, by the way, if we don't sell any coffee, we're going to be stuck with probably $3 billion of real estate. Imagine making that presentation to your board of directors, right? The only thing that Starbucks did do, so, saturated market, like the only thing Starbucks did do is they created their own playground. They created this community. If you remember the beginning of Starbucks, they're like, come here, don't even buy anything. Just hang out. Now it's different, but right? Do your meetings here. I don't even care if you buy coffee. They took a commodity and essentially said, this is our playground. Our playground, this is where you're going to go outside your office and meet and all the stuff that we know about Starbucks. So these are not necessarily groundbreaking playgrounds. They just have to be spots and positioning in areas where you're going to win. Remember, for those of you who have ever heard the story of McDonald's used to make the chairs uncomfortable so moms with their kids would leave quicker. Like the complete opposite of Starbucks, right? So the point is that whether it was my health rewards business or somebody like Starbucks or any of the other examples we'll share across this, the key is how do you find that spot where you go, that's mine, I'm going to do it my way. And then you're defining the pricing, you're defining the rules of roles, you're defining the speed limit, if you will, right? Like when you go into Idaho, I didn't know this until I went there, there's no speed limit. If you go into Idaho in certain spots, it's just, are you a reckless driver or not? So when you go into Idaho and you own in Idaho, when somebody else shows up, even if they have more money, they're like, no speed limit here, man. And that's what the playground allows you to do. It allows you to create a pocket, and then you are defining that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, 2 + 2 equals what you say it equals.
Right. So what do you think is the first step when someone is really starting to look at, as they're going to build out their company, figuring out what industry they're in, the value proposition, what are 1 or 2 strong steps to take early on to start finding and identifying that playground for themselves?
The first is you got to almost run a little process around it, right? You got to run a process that brings in the best thought you have around you, your advisors, your friends that are smart, right? And you say, I have this idea in this area, and run a process meeting, a weekly meeting. Like this is, honestly, we believe this is the most important thing you do when we all use the same tools, right? So the first thing, like any good initiative, is run a process, not do it for a day and disappear. Say, right, a month from now, we're going to do it. We're going to hold a weekly meeting. We're going to put all our smartest constituents, and many of us may have non-employees, right? So that's just me, an advisor, a really smart friend, somebody that doesn't have the same last name as you, right? And that's number 1, is the process. Number 2, one of the big challenges that we all have as entrepreneurs is we fall in love with our tech platform, our meatballs, our new pair of shoes. And so we spend all this time telling the world, I have a great it, I have a great it, I have a great it. When at the end of the day, my it, rewarding people for being healthy, was my it when I started better than American Express's it? Of course not. That's not the point. And so the effort that we put in is 90% around the it, we'll call it the product or service, and 10% around, right, finding the playground. So the second step, again, in this process is assume you have the ideal it. It is, if it came down from the heavens, whatever your meatball or your shoe or your technology, it's perfect, it's ideal, okay? Because as we all know, if you say, hey, we've got a great technology platform, somebody else can do that with money, right? So you say, if I have the ideal it, then the effort isn't 90% making my it better, 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 better. It's how do I find the playground, right? There are deficient products that sell awesome because of the playground. Great example, Rick, Nick, you're a runner, I'm a runner, you have other, right? If you go back to the 90s and the 2000s, if you asked 100 runners, which running shoes are better, Nike or Saucony? How many runners would say Nike?
That's a good
Nobody.
question.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Right? And yet Nike sells 10 times more running sneakers than Saucony. Okay.
Yeah.
What they decided was the playground, right, was about just do it.
Yep.
And positioning, even though anybody who runs would never, they've gotten a little bit better, but back then people were like, why do people buy running? They would almost laugh at runners that bought Nike running shoes. So the point is, you can have a better it. Saucony had a better it, right? All Nike did was to say, running isn't about running, right? Running is about achievement and motivation. And again, when I say these playgrounds, it's not always a market segment. It's not always a positioning. It's not always a demographic. That's the challenge, right? Is in Starbucks, it was just a community. In our case, it was just a different market we were going after. But don't focus so much on it. Just assume that if you find your playground, you're going to create the best it in the world. Right?
Yeah. I want to, thank you for saying all that, because I want to pause and hold and really talk about some of these thoughts. You'll notice I posted in the chat one of my favorite books, Shoe Dog. And Shoe Dog is the story of Nike, and essentially the story told by Phil Knight, who is the founder of Nike. And it's dramatically influenced me as a founder and dramatically influenced the concept of finding your playground. I mean, there's too many tie-ins to, make too many jokes here, but the point is, you read that book and you understand that exactly what Michael just said, which is, there were running shoes. There were, this was actually back earlier in the day when it actually, he was starting to run a lot, and he's like, am I weird? Like, am I weird? Because I like to go run a lot. And, so he realized that they needed dedicated shoes for it, but there was already shoes on the market. And clearly they weren't going to be the only running shoes company, but the story is an illustration of how he he was very passionate about this, but Nike created the entire industry that we're now very familiar with, which is the everyday athlete. And it's hundreds of billions of dollars. And they brought into the general public active wear, running, and then now performance training, equipment and, clothing. And then just the concept of champion and the concept of pursuit of excellence. And I look at that and I'm like, oh my gosh. And what I take from that, and I'm kind of wrapping in a little bit of, just founder's life story, because I think we went and found our own playground, is, you got to look at your ecosystem and understand where the players are and what's happening currently. And then you find the corner that you can own or put your stakes in the ground, say, this is where we are. And you know what part of it is part of it is your core values, right? And part of it is, okay, Founders Live could be known as just another networking event. Founders Live could be known as just another entrepreneurial community. There's a reason why we're not a Facebook group. We had to, first and foremost, identify what we are. What are we about? What's the why? What's the mission? What's the vision? What separates us from all the other entrepreneurial groups out there? And that was, without even putting words to it, Michael, that's what I did this years ago, and it's still happening, but really finding that playground and saying, we're going to be known as this. So when Joe tells Jane or Jane tells Julie about Founders Live, they're going to use these words. and they're going to say that's their corner of the playground. I haven't seen anything else like it.
Yep.
And it takes that amount of high level thinking, and really you're just chiseling out of this rock, you're chiseling out what your brand is. And through that chisel, you're identifying the core values that are important to you as an organization that then will attract your users, because they're like, I identify with that. I have not heard a company talk about like that before. These are the things that Nike did early on. These are the things that you clearly did in your company. And these are the things that Founders Live has done. And I can tell you that it's not easy, but the work you put in early on in that path just is like dividends. Like it's orders of magnitude more beneficial than just trying to be the cheapest XYZ, or we're going to beat them on price, or we're going to like just do, you know what I mean?
Well, I think also that, every single one of us as entrepreneurs always say, well, wait a minute, competition's ever. I mean, imagine the days back in, the 70s and the 80s where you came up with an idea, you went out drinking with your friends and you got drunk and you came up with an idea, and the next day nobody was doing it and you actually had 5 years to do it, right? That's not the world we live in. And anybody who says they don't have competition is just kidding themselves, right? So everybody has competition everywhere. So the point is that if we're just showing up, any of us, and just doing the same thing, right? We're going to lose. We all think that we're doing things differently and unique, of course, but in an environment where, as you said, Nick, most people think, and frankly, right now it's probably true, you can get almost anything for free. Like if I walk into an Audi dealership right now and say, I don't know if I'm going to buy an Audi, but I want to drive it around for 2 months, there's going to be somebody that'll give it to me for free for 2 months to go drive it around. So when you're competing with free and you're competing with people that have other capital, anything that you do that's right in front of you is what everybody else is doing. If you're a yoga instructor and you've transitioned your yoga online, or put differently, if you have an ice cream cone in your business and you've just put different sprinkles on it, that's what everybody else is doing. And unless you have more capital, like Nike had more capital, you can make a really good argument. If they didn't have all that capital, it wouldn't have worked. But this whole idea of finding a playground is you've got to find that spot, right? Where you're doing something completely, like if you had I remember there was a woman who was trying to get a podcast, an African-American woman who was trying to get a podcast, and she had a pretty loyal audience, right? And she was talking about how to appeal to, the Black community, about, how to deal with some societal issues. This is pre, some of the recent developments. And we said, okay, that's interesting and of course needed. I was like, but what if you took a white woman and you had them give advice to Black people about Black people's issues? Like, you might get assassinated, but boy, would you be different, right? And it's those types of things, the things that don't just come off the page, right? That's why, Nick, when you asked the question, what do? You got to put your smartest people around a room. And a lot of times those people have to come from different ways, shapes, and forms, because we all think, when we think yoga instructor, the next thing we think is, okay, online classes, and then we'll move to mind body, and then we'll move to nutrition, right? But what if you're a yoga instructor that help people write books? I don't know, that might be stupid. But the playgrounds you have to find have to be these pockets that you go, oh, and I can tell you, your mindset changes very quickly from, oh my God, I have all this competition, to, wow, I can win this pocket. And that becomes your North Star about everything. I can tell you, one of the other tangential concept that comes out of this playground is you either get or have unique knowledge, right? A lot of times your playground gets defined by the knowledge you already have, right? And Nick, I think I've told you a story before that I'll share with the group, that there was a politician in South Florida that was a very polished state senator from Florida that was running for the mayor of Miami Beach. And she looked like Barbara Bush, and she looked political, and she had all the chops and a ton of money. And she was running against somebody from the other party, and there was a scandal with the person from the other party, and they had to drop out. So they went to this local alderman, this guy, and they said, hey, listen, there's a month left to the election. Our candidate just had a scandal. We need to put somebody up in the election. You're going to get killed, but It'll be good for your visibility. And he said, okay, I'll do it. And so they have a debate the next day or next week, whatever. And, you know, the polls are like 50% her and nobody knows him. So 5% him. And they get up and they do the debate and they say, okay, so to the alderman, so what is your policy? Tell us a little bit about you and your policy. And he said, listen, I grew up in Miami Beach. I'm not a politician my whole life. He goes, all I know is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fix the pothole on 5th and Collins. For those of you who know Miami Beach, you know, Collins Avenue is the main drag there. And everybody kind of clapped or whatever. And then they went over to her, you know, very polished politician. And she gave what you'd expect, a very, you know, political. She's like, not only are we going to fix the pothole on 5th and Collins, we're going to fix every pothole on Collins Avenue and every pothole on, and everybody's going to have blah, 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 blah. And then he went back to the alderman and they said, okay, sir, how do you respond to that? And he goes, there is no pothole on 5th and Collins. And the next day, the polls were 50-50, right? When you define your playground, you're either using knowledge you have that other people don't have, or you develop knowledge in that playground that, again, you're defining the speed limit, right?
Yeah.
And when you get that, all of a sudden, so think about him, no money, no visibility. The next day, the polls are 50-50. He owns it at that point. The next commentary, if he went out there and said, I want to fix the flag on 8th and Collins, she would be like, I don't even know what to say. Right? So when you find the playground, which again is hard to find, but when you find the playground, you define it. You define how it gets priced, how it gets bought, what the buying criteria are, what the product should look like. And I'm overstating it a little bit because, of course, if you have enough money, you can follow. But a lot of times big companies follow in a really clunky way, right? And if they follow and and you've set the rules, you can set yourself up for a lot of success.
Yeah, and I want to follow that with, this is why core values are so important. The core values crystallize what that playground is, or at least what the definition of that is. They crystallize it. They make that identifiable to that brand. And then it's much, much harder to compete with your brand, because the moment they copy, you cannot copy core values. It's fraudulent and it looks very, very, you know, desperate. And so each company has to have their own core values and their own brand. And so I feel like that part of the way that you insulate in that playground is the definition of the like what is meaningful and what we stand for and all that. And so I think that is such an important thing. I want to bring in Nicholas. Actually, he mentioned something. Nicholas focuses on customer experience and has some thoughts on this. But Nicholas, share that, you know, really you can't be everything to everyone, because I think that's a really interesting segue in this conversation.
Yeah, I was afraid maybe you're going to ask me to elaborate on my snarky comments as well. Michael, this is awesome. This is what I try to tell my clients all the time, is that you have to know who you are. And Nick, you are articulating, you don't need to come to me, you are articulating it perfectly. You need to know who you are and what you're all about. And there's a reason that I never fly Southwest Airlines. And that is the same reason that Southwest Airlines has such loyal customers, because they have defined and they have described who their ideal customers are, and they just swarmed. And Michael, you're playing my tune, absolutely.
Well, that's a great example, Nicholas. That's a great example of a playground, right? They basically said, we are gonna make it the cheapest, and we're gonna do crazy things like not assign you seats, and crazy things, right? Like not give you the ability to get food, and like things that at the time were like, whoa. And they just basically said, our playground is going to be cost. So, but they can win there, and they can win there with less money, less frills. Like they're defining all the rules. Whereas if we looked at it objectively, people are like, why would you do that? You get meals on other flights. And that is, you know, we talk about it in the context of entrepreneurism. That's the most capital intensive competitive industry on the planet. And they won. And in fact, during some of the downturns, as you know, if you've read Good to Great, they're one of the companies that made it and made money across that whole time. So it's a great example of a playground.
Well, I'll even add further to this, which is, you know, it may be counterintuitive to, you know, you listening. It was for me for a long time, which was, wait. You mean to say that as we create this brand, we need to push out everyone and really define a small segment, very, very defined individuals or companies that are going to be our target customers, and we should ignore everyone else? Why would we do that? And I think Nicholas will have some other thoughts on this at some point, but the reason why you do that is so that that's the definition of, you got to find it. It's a small piece of real estate, small piece of playground initially, that strongly identifies the core values. It strongly it calls to certain people, and it excludes a lot of people probably. And the reason why that's important is because that's really what I've discovered is the only way to really jumpstart a brand and get momentum, is that you actually, this wraps in, you might have heard, like, you know, the 1,000 raving fans. You need to reach the 1,000 raving fans before you reach the million. And you don't want 1 million downloads in 24 hours. You actually don't, because most of the time, whatever you did, they're gonna be gone, because those are not your target market. You want to nail down that initial group that are your raving fans, and that's how brands grow. You know, at one point, Apple was literally having to ask Microsoft for a loan, and Apple had to, you know, build they had a small following, and they are now the largest, or if not close to the largest company in the world. But they focused on their raving fans first. And then the more you serve them, people start talking about your brands, people start sharing it out, and you can start opening up, like serving others. But it actually does not go the other way. It just doesn't. You can't serve anyone.
Well, I think, you know, there used to be more blockbuster drugs, right? Where you could do something going back 10 or 20 years where you served, those playgrounds could be bigger, right? Lipitor, Viagra, or like the pharmaceutical industry that's solving these big problems. But just like in the drug community, now there's little pockets that you win and little different approaches that you win. And the same thing is in the world today. Unless you have a significant amount of capital, it's really, really hard. I mean, think about somebody like Quibi, right? Quibi, for those of you know, no lack of capital investment, the most well-known leaders on the planet, you know, started out with a unique concept of 7-minute videos, and, you know, all their content, I think it's now 10-minute videos. Very, very different and unique approach. They're trying to find their playground, right? And so I think people recognize that, you know, finding your playground's not that easy. I mean, obviously they're facing the impacts of COVID and all that stuff like everybody else. But when you think about these pockets and these market segments, it's harder to think broadly and holistically, even if you had endless capital, right? It's hardly think that way because of all the competition that exists in the world. Winning pockets, you know, Nick, to your example of 1,000 raving fans, it's really a good analogy to say you got to win a spot, right? And that spot becomes your playground. I'll give you an example. We were working with a wellness company, right? And as all of you may know, while wellness companies were new in 2000, there's 1,000 wellness companies, right? Type wellness company on Google and say wellness companies that start letter A, you'll get 1,000, right? And at the end of the day, they're all, I won't say they're all doing the same thing, but they're essentially trying to improve healthcare behaviors for health plans and employers so they can save money. And so anybody going into that industry, you know, it's hard, even though it's a big problem so we were working with this one company and they were struggling, and they provided, you know, diabetes solutions, you know, all the normal stuff. And we asked them, tell us a little bit about your programs and about this and that and the other thing. And like many entrepreneurs, they originally talked about the it, and we're like, okay, but tell us more about, and it turned out that they had done a couple of programs for the Hispanic community, right? For a health plan. And we said, okay, tell us a little bit more about that. And it turned out that in their learning about serving the Hispanic community, there were two things that were super interesting that jumped out. Number one, religion played a huge role, right? So if their pastor or priest or whatever told them not to eat donuts, they wouldn't eat donuts, right? They listened to their religious leaders because it was obviously so steeped in many of the Hispanic cultures out there. And the other was transportation. A lot of these communities, individuals were interested in being healthy. They couldn't get where they needed to get to. And so we said, okay, there's something there. You now have a playground. You've got this unique know-how. So they repackaged the company and specialized only in wellness programs for Hispanic community. All of a sudden, they've got their playground. And they're saying, walking into a sales meeting saying against big companies, WebMD, United Healthcare, and saying, what's the two most important things for a wellness program for the Hispanic community, right? And really polished executives from United Healthcare would say, diabetes, this, that. They'd be like, your priest, right? So it's just another example of those pockets can't be blockbuster drugs anymore.
Yeah.
Because the world is too saturated. But I can tell you one thing, the Hispanic healthcare market and Hispanic healthcare costs, that isn't a small market. So even it's not, even though it's not the blockbuster drug, to your point, if you start to win, when you find these playgrounds, they don't only have to be the 4 people in your neighborhood, right? I mean, they can be significant, like healthcare costs in the Hispanic community.
So I want to bring in Sean. Sean has a question around, the playground and evolving over time. Sean, share your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on evolving that playground over time. I think that there's a lot of, it is hard to find what your playground is. And there's a thought of, it's kind of set it and forget it. It's like, once you find that golden nugget, you just run with it over time. But as startups, you got to be constantly evolving. And when is that right time? You mentioned the example of Nike earlier. Like, they defined a playground and it's worked really well for them and they can kind of sit in that. But, Saucony, there's no reason they couldn't have evolved to that playground. They couldn't have shifted to that if they had the right metrics telling them that they should have. Or I think about, crossing the chasm as a startup. When you're first trying to get, traction, you're marketing to a very specific subset of people who may care about something different. They may be price insensitive, but they want to be on the cutting edge. That's how they succeed in their job. But once you get that group, now your playground is price or something like that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think there's 2 concepts at play here. Number one of the big fallacies and one of the big mistakes I think we all make as entrepreneurs is we chase revenue wherever it is, right? We say, like, if there was $1 million on Saturn, we'd go to Saturn, right? And when you go to work a different way every day, you just never get it right. You gotta, even if it's just, gut, you gotta pick your market and go, because you just learn how the weather affects you and you learn how the traffic, you gotta kind of go, and you need some flexibility in terms of your guardrails. But if you bounce around, if you're doing something new when you start, you're gonna have challenges in every market because it's new. Right. So if you go, hey, customers that start letter A, and then they say, well, it's too pricey, and you go over here, you got to really pick one and go. Now, let's say you get some traction. Let's say they get the Hispanic community, right? Then they could extend that. They could say, okay, I'm not just going to offer that to health plans. I'm also going to offer that to employers, right? So a natural extension. Or they could say, we really specialize in wellness programs tied to specific ethnicities, right? So we're going to take that concept that we've gotten to be known for, right, and apply it to the Asian American community or the whatever, because that's the way we build it. So I don't think you necessarily have to be static when you get there. But I think the more important point is that if you try to be all things to all people, you don't have the capital and the resources to do it. You got to, Nick, as you said, you got to win a spot. And when you win the spot, get to be known for, right, either Hispanic, where I go to other places where I can win the Hispanic. Listen, you could go to other Hispanic products, right? You might not have to do wellness, right? You might have a foothold in Hispanic where you do other extensions. So I do think that you, especially if your initial playground is kind of small, you do have to think about the next stages. But you've got to go win a piece. And then when you win a piece, that becomes the foundation for, a whole bunch of other types of credibility, success, capital, right? bringing on, you know, team members that wouldn't have joined you then, but would join you now because you're the ones doing, you know, X and Y and Z.
And Michael, you just to add to that, what you're saying is, and Sean, this is, I guess, my thoughts of the answer. The initial playground and the 1,000 raving fans, and essentially that goes to 2,000 and 5,000 and whatnot. That creates very, very strong momentum, and things what Michael just mentioned, the growth of the team, people want to work for the company. There's more and more people. When more and more people start loving the brand, here's what happens, I think, is the magic. The referral kicks in, the word of mouth kicks in, the way that brand grows without you as an organization marketing anything becomes the key. So your raving fans will naturally, if you're doing the right job, they will naturally tell other people. And no money can earn that. No amount of money can, a Super Bowl commercial does not achieve that. And if you look at by exponential growth, you get 1,000 telling 1,000 more people, and 2,000 telling 2,000 more people, and 10,000. That's what you achieve by really nailing down that unique, like the playground and what's unique and why are you existing, and who do you serve, and how do you make them feel? It's all that stuff, I think.
And that credibility, Nick, if you were in a local town and you started a restaurant and that restaurant was a Mexican restaurant and it did great, you could start a second Mexican restaurant, or you could start an Italian restaurant, because you would have that momentum and the credibility. It goes, oh, the guys that started the Mexican places are opening up an Italian. Like, so to your point, you've got to find that playground where you can win, right? And if you do find that playground and you do start to get that foundation that you're mentioning, then from that point you can extend it, you know, in lots of different directions.
So it feels, you know, if you're listening to this, yes, it does feel, it's the slower road. I think it's the better and stronger road. It can be the slower road. That's okay. And, you know, I would encourage people to think about the long-term, what is the long-term path here? What is the vision of our company? And, you know, I personally, as an entrepreneur, don't believe in the shortcuts that a lot of the media talks about. And, you know, so anytime I see when I see these breakout, you know, most of the time when they're breakout apps and they're like, they're going up, I'm like, they're coming down, you know? And there's one I'll share real quick, and then we'll kind of go into a closing here. But I don't know if you're all familiar with HQ Trivia, and that got popular a couple of years ago. And basically it's a pretty genius, interesting idea, which was like at a certain time, if you download the app, it would, in real time, I think it was 2 times a day, there would be literally a live trivia happening through the app. And if you successfully, like, you would answer a question, it was on 10-second time frame, and you would go to the next question if you answered it right, and there would be a cash prize at the end. So literally, like, they would have hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, in real time playing a trivia game on the app, like in midday. And their hook, though, was win money. So I'm like, I can see where this goes. So it's literally like the lottery. The reason the lottery is there is because it grows and grows, and people want to win millions of dollars, and it's like unsustainable in one way or another. If you're a startup that has limited capital, or at least at some point limited access to capital, you can't have the carrot continually getting bigger and thinking that you're like, if you think about what they did, yes, they kind of got a playground, but their playground was on like quicksand, basically. It was not on firm soil, and it just kind of rose. And then, they ended up raising some money at like a pretty high valuation, and it was just a gimmick. And soon people got tired of like buzzing every day. It's like, oh, at HQ Trivia again, I'm in a meeting. I'm over that. But their prizes kept getting bigger, so that they just kept sugarcoating it to get more people to come in. And at some point it's unsustainable. And so,
yeah, you know, like Nick, I don't think it's necessarily slow versus fast. I think there are playgrounds you find fast, like they jump off. I'd say they jump off the page because they're not natural. They do take some thought, but you can brainstorm and go, huh, wow, I didn't think of that, and get it. I do think, though, if I hear you correctly, the idea of kind of going out and working and doing and launching websites and saying, I'm an accounting firm and I'm just going to be better, you know, no, you've got to put a little differently, go slow to go fast, right? You've got to have,
when
if
I
you
say
don't
that,
have that playground first, you'll work just as hard as the next guy or gal.
But what I'm saying is, you know, whether it's slower or faster, it's a long road. You cannot put the cart before the horse. If you're going to do it right, it takes a little time. Do the hard work first to determine what is our core values, what is important to us, what identifies us, and what differentiates us. We established this area and this playground. You might only be serving 100 or 1,000 initial fans. You do that right, you will reach much, much more than that. But it takes time, right? So we don't have too much more time left. I wanted to open it up. Hey, it's, you know, if you want to chat or have a comment, ask Michael a question, let us know. I know we have, we have 5 more minutes here. So any last thoughts? You know, Aga over there or Caden, you know, anyone, you know, what are your thoughts there?
You know, I personally really, you know, this line of thinking is really critical. Like that's sort of what I started doing when I first started my project. Is I was, you know, I saw a problem and wanted to try to fix it because I didn't see anybody else trying to solve it. You know, everybody can have ideas that are, you know, everybody can have a great idea, but then, you know, somebody somewhere has probably already thought of it or is trying to do it. So you know, finding the space that isn't supported and finding a place that, you know, has a problem you can solve with whatever that it is, you know, that's the most important part. And yeah, so I totally agree. It's really, you know, interesting stuff.
Nick, there was an interesting question that popped up. I don't know if you saw it, about, you know, when investors are looking for broad markets and you talk about finding this unique playground. It's a really good question, because if you think about what investors are really looking for, right? They're looking for big markets that you have a unique approach to, right? So both of those things have to work together, right? If you think about rewarding people for being healthy, you know, we could say conceptually to an investor, this is a big market. We're going to start with making purple people healthy, right? Because purple people, we've got credibility in the purple people. So you do, because investors also want to see focus, right? And traction and all those other things in addition to the big market. So when you find your playground, if I was pitching to an investor, let's use the example of the Hispanic Wellness Company, I would paint the vision of being, if you take the top 5, you know, ethnic groups in America and the healthcare costs, I mean, that would be ultimately the vision of the company. We're going to start with the Hispanic community.
Yeah.
And take it to the other. So it's a really great point between this balance between, hey, I'm focused and I'm winning the 7 people in my neighborhood, but if I'm only winning 7 people, there's no venture capitalist that's going to be interested in it.
Well, it's just it's a matter of painting the large vision and working backwards and showing them, here's where we're starting, and the logical and smart method that we're going to take to then achieve that large vision, billions plus market, if that's the case. But yeah, just show a path to it, you know. So that was Nicholas's question of, you know, how does this narrow focus affect raising money, and especially investors that want growth potential. So yeah, it's kind of like, the way I say it is like one eye on the horizon and one eye like right down here, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you know, that's the challenge of an entrepreneur, is to be able to see that, okay, where is it going on the horizon, and then where is it, you know, in the next near term, what are we going to do, and how do we get that momentum forward? Yeah. So you're selling the approach to the investors, you're selling the vision to the investors. You are also selling the approach. And in the end, the fact is they're looking for the proof, which is the traction. So a lot of times checks don't come from the first meeting. They're going to be like, cool, great, interesting. Let's continue to talk. They want to see trends. They want to see multiple times when they meet with you that you're moving in the direction that you told them 3 months ago was going to happen. So if that's true, then yes. So they're looking for that. They're looking for the data points that you're actually achieving what you laid out 3 months ago when you initially talked with them. But hey, how about this? What a great conversation. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, the Lonely Entrepreneur. Thank you, Victoria. So Victoria has placed into the chat, if you all want to check that out before we leave here, there's some links in there, follow-ups, content and information, education that follows these topics that we talked about today. So please check those out.
And Nick, I think one other thing just to add, I think,
yeah.
and your community probably knows this about you and your commitment to this. I mean, you guys have spent time and money and resources to bring our platform to bear for this community, right? And so I think, you know, Nick is so dedicated to this community, and you know, Founders Live really has gone out and said, especially in a COVID world, like, what are the things that we have to bring to the table to do it? And so, you know, this community, I hope, appreciates the fact that you know, trying to bring more and more value to the table each and every day.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yes, you know, we're together. We're really bringing some great stuff to the community. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. This was a learning series along with the Lonely Entrepreneur. Thank you all for participating, being here. If you're listening later online or on the podcast, thank you for listening.
When's the next one?
Yeah, the next one. We do this every month. We haven't, I mean, I don't know, Victoria, if you remember, but we haven't set that. It's not published yet online, so we will get this out, but it'll be sometime in August, probably.
Yeah, we didn't publish it yet. Yep.
Early to mid-August. So Vincent, you will definitely get a notification about that. So we'll be announcing that very soon.